There are four people in chapter 25 that I wanted to draw specific attention to, namely Swift, Voltaire, Rousseau, and Kant. Not necessarily in that order, but they were serious contributors to the intellectual history of the period. So I wanted to spend some time discussing their biographical information as well as some of their ideas. Swift was born in Dublin on November 30th, 1667, 7 months after his father's death. He was the son of Jonathan Swift and Abigail Eric, and since both parents were from England, Swift, though born and educated in Ireland, did not think of himself as Irish. He attended Kilkenny Grammar School and Trinity College, Dublin, where, because of disciplinary problems, he obtained his BA degree only by special grace. In 1689, Swift left for England, becoming secretary to Sir William Temple, through whom he apparently hoped to achieve some advancements in political affairs, but didn't actually happen. He received his MA degree in 1692 from Hart Hall, Oxford. Swift took orders as a priest of the Anglican Church of Ireland early in 1695, more to achieve independence than out of any particular religious fervor. An interesting fact is, when Swift was about a year old, his wet nurse took him and crossed the Irish Sea to Whitehaven, which is a small town on the northwest coast of England, and he remained there for several years with no contact with his family. Swift never knew his father, was abandoned by his mother, and felt humiliated by his uncle, who ends up raising him and grudgingly doing so. So far as human nature was concerned, Swift was a pessimist, and his satire reflected that. People really thought that his view of human nature was pretty negative, quite desolate, hopeless. In fact, many people who interpret his Gulliver's Travels say that it's almost misanthropic. I mean, it's quite the negative perspective of human nature. Now, Swift's ideas were not always shared by others, especially those beginning to entertain new views of human nature. In his time, thinkers were arguing that, far from being selfish and fallen, human nature is basically benevolent. Perhaps the only fall we have experienced is the belief that we are fallen. These ideas would later be developed by Rousseau, who would argue that not people but institutions that surround them are corrupt. And so even though maybe some scholars would contend that Swift was not a very fervent Anglican priest, however, coming from and out of an era where human nature is one of the primary components in understanding sin, righteousness, judgment, and things like that, to hold a view of human nature as being corrupt and fallen is not uncommon, to say the least. Now, Rousseau, he was born June 28, 1712 in Geneva, Switzerland. He died July 2nd, 1778 in France. Rousseau was a French philosopher. He was Swiss-born. He was an author. He's also a political theorist and a composer. His full name is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he ranks as actually one of the greatest figures of the French Enlightenment. So both Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the man, and his writings as well, constituted a problem for anyone who wanted to grasp his thought and to understand his life. He claimed that his work presented a coherent outlook, yet many critics have found only contradictions and passionate outbursts of rhetoric. One interpreter has called Rousseau an irresponsible writer with a fatal gift for epigram. In the eyes of others, Rousseau was not a serious thinker, but only a mere feeler who occasionally had a great thought. Still, others have found Rousseau a mere juggler of words and definitions. Even those who turn to him as an innovating genius have been at odds concerning what he advocated. Rousseau has been variously applauded or denounced as the founder of the Romantic movement in literature, as the intellectual father of the French Revolution, as a passionate defender of individual freedom and private property, as a socialist even, as a collectivist totalitarian, as a superb critic of the social order, and as a silly and pernicious utopian. Some Few critics, notably one Gustav Lanson and E.H. Wright, have taken Rousseau at his word and believe that he attempted to answer only one question, and this is important. How can civilized man recapture the benefits of natural man and yet neither return to the state of nature nor renounce the advantages of the social state? Three major periods characterize Rousseau's life. The first is 1712 to 1750, which culminated in the succès des scandales of his Discours sur les sciences et les arts. And these are some of his works, and I don't speak French, so there you go. The second would be a period known from 1750 to 1762, and saw the publication of his closely related major works in 1761, 1762, and in 1762. Again, one of his later works there in that period, Du Contrat Social. The last period, which is 1762 to 1778, found Rousseau an outcast, hounded from country to country, his books condemned and burned, and a personage respected and with influential friends. The Confessions, Dialogues, and Les Rivieres du Promeneur Solitaire date from this period. Now for a little bit about Voltaire. Voltaire was a French poet, dramatist, historian, and philosopher. He lived from 1694 to 1778. He was an outspoken and aggressive enemy of every injustice, but especially of religious intolerance. His works are an outstanding embodiment of the principles of the French Enlightenment. Now, Voltaire was the pen name for François-Marie Arouet. He was an influential popularizer of Newtonian natural philosophy. His enduring reputation rests on his witty essays and religious and moral topics, especially the Philosophical Letters of 1734 and the Philosophical Dictionary 1764. He is known for his brilliant stories and his passionate polemics against all kinds of injustices, especially religious injustices. Although he used the term theist to describe his philosophy, Voltaire was what we would call a deist. He believed in the Creator, who did not supernaturally intervene in the world. His strong belief in the design of nature kept Voltaire from atheism. Voltaire did not believe that the existence of God is inborn. He observed that some nations have no knowledge of a creating deity. Like consciousness of a moral law, the sense of deity develops gradually, though inevitably as one contemplates the evidence of God placed in the natural world. Voltaire greatly detested all revealed religions, especially Christianity. In fact, he targeted Pascal in his 25th philosophical letter, where he purported that Pascal was neither enlightened nor humanitarian, and that he encouraged fanaticism. Pascal's wager basically says, which is what Voltaire was attacking, was this wager that Pascal had come up with. And the Pascal's wager is basically that it's better to believe in God, die, and find out he doesn't exist than to live as an atheist, die, and then find out that he does. So Voltaire did not like that philosophical idea at all. One interesting note about Voltaire is that he does have a bit of anti-Semitism found in his works. And there was one particular letter in 1771 that he wrote to Memmius to Cicero, a letter of Memmius to Cicero, where Voltaire is actually posing as this Memmius, who's an ancient Roman. It's kind of a made-up kind of letter. But this is what Voltaire says. He says, speaking of the Jews, he says, "They are, all of them, born with raging fanaticism in their hearts, just as the Bretons and the Germans are born with blonde hair. I would not be in the least bit surprised if these people would not someday become deadly to the human race." So that's a little bit of a touch of some of the anti-Semitism we can find in Voltaire, and I am working on a PhD that has an emphasis in Holocaust studies and anti-Semitism. So whenever I discover these things, I like to bring them to the surface just so we can say, here we have evidence of this kind of thinking that has plagued even some of the great philosophers. In another essay, One Must Take Sides, as it's called, Voltaire says this. He says, "You have surpassed all nations in impertinent fables, in bad conduct, and in barbarism. You deserve to be punished, for this is your destiny." Speaking of the Jews, and this is hardly the rhetoric of a man who thinks that Jews are just another people waiting to be enlightened. It is the talk of a noble Roman, again, his favorite self-definition, who has, in this is kind of thinking, has no patience with inferior people such as the Jews as he saw it. And so just a little touch of Voltaire's anti-Semitism. And lastly, we come to Immanuel Kant, great philosopher, fascinating thinker, but not really a very exciting life. But he was born April 22nd, 1724, in Königsberg, Prussia, and he died February 12th, 1804, in Königsberg, Prussia. He was German. His occupation was philosophy. He was a philosopher. Immanuel Kant was the propounder of the critical philosophy. He was born in Prussia. He was the son of a saddler, and according to his own account, the grandson of an immigrant from Scotland. He was educated at the local high school, the Collegium Fredericanum, and at the University of Königsberg, where he had the good fortune to encounter a first-class teacher in the philosopher Martin Knudsen. After leaving the university about 1746, Kant was employed for a few years as a tutor in a number of families in different parts of East Prussia. He kept up his studies during this period, and in 1755 was able to take his master's degree at Königsberg and began teaching in the university as a private docent, or a tutor, or introductory. He'd be like a lecturer, just a basic sort of introductory type level lecturer. He taught a wide variety of subjects, including physics, mathematics, and physical geography, as well as philosophy, but nevertheless remained poor for many years. It was not until 1770, when he was appointed to the chair of logic and metaphysics at Königsberg, that his financial stringencies were eased. Kant's first book, Gedanken von der wahren Schatzung der lebenden Kräfte. Yeah, that was easy to say, right? Thoughts on the true estimation of living forces would be the English translation of that. It was first published as early as 1747 in Königsberg, and between 1754 and 1770, he produced an impressive stream of essays and treatises. His earlier works are primarily contributions to natural science or natural philosophy, the most notable being his General History of Nature and Theory of the Heavens of 1755. It was not until after 1760 that philosophical interest in the modern sense became dominant in his mind. Kant's publications had already won him a considerable reputation in German learned circles by the time he obtained his professorship. The 10 years following his appointment, from a period of literary silence during which Kant was engaged in preparing his magnum opus, The Critique of Pure Reason, the appearance of the critique was eagerly awaited by Kant's friends and philosophical colleagues. But when it at last came out in 1781, the general reaction was more bewilderment than admiration. Kant tried to remove misunderstandings by restating the main argument in the Prolegomena, or the prologue of every future metaphysics that he wrote, of 1783, and by rewriting some of the central sections of the critique for a second edition in 1787. At the same time, he continued, with most remarkable energy for a man of his years, the elaboration of the rest of his system. By 1790, the Critique of Practical Reason and the Critique of Judgment were in print, and the major treatises only Religion, Within the Bounds of Mere Reason, 1793, and Metaphysic Moral, 1797, had still to appear. Kant then enjoyed a tremendous reputation throughout Germany and was beginning to be known, though scarcely to be understood, in other European countries. Kant's outer life was almost entirely uneventful. He never married. The one occasion on which he might have become politically prominent was in 1794, when, after the appearance of his book on religion, the Prussian king asked him not to publish further on a topic on which his views were causing alarm to the Orthodox. But Kant only promised that he wouldn't, and no scandal ensued. For the rest of his life, he fulfilled the duties of his professorship and took his turn as rector of the university. He dined regularly with his friends. He admired Rousseau and the French Revolution from afar. He conversed eagerly with travelers who brought him news of a wider world he never saw himself. Never very robust in physical stature, he carefully conserved his physical resources and was in good health until he died. Relatively, before he died, he was completely healthy, and he was nearly 80 when he died in 1804. So just to summarize, among Kant's most important philosophical works are the Critique of Pure Reason, the Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics, Idea for a Universal History, Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals, Metaphysical Foundations of Natural Science, Critique of Practical Reason, Critique of Judgment, Religion Within the Limits of Reason Alone, Perpetual Peace, Metaphysics of Ethics, and lastly, the Anthropology from a Pragmatic Point of View. So that is a summary of Kant's works, and that's just a little glimpse into the biography of Kant, Voltaire, Rousseau, and Jonathan Swift. So there we have chapter 25, a few of the key figures that contributed to the intellectual history of that period.